What industry is shadier than most people realize? Story 1: The tattoo industry isn't necessarily shady, but there are some major gaps between good artists and shitty ones. I have worked with straight-up crackheads who I wouldn't let draw on me in marker. Yet year after year, they find work in shops. Always check portfolio and talk to the artist. If they seem sketchy or disinterested, nope the out. Story 2: Funerals and caskets. Nothing like preying on grieving survivors to try and sell them the most glorious satin-lined mahogany box to plant their loved one in the ground. Edit wow. Lots of replies. No way I can respond to everyone individually. A quick PSA for those of you who want to donate your body. My family has been using Medcure. Org for full body non-transplant donation. Usable organs tissue go to hospitals and research facilities. Anything remaining is cremated, and the ashes are either distributed at sea or returned to the family. All of this is at no cost to you, $0. My mom's cremation, documentation, and return of ashes alone cost us over $2,000 as a child of the Depression and lifelong penny pincher. She would have been furious about that. My brother and dad had registered with Medcure. So for them, we zero cremation expenses, no stress about what to do immediately following their death. We were much happier to spend money on the memorial events. If you're not bound by spiritual or cultural death rituals, or prefer a frugal lifestyle, or want to benefit scientific research, look at a non-transplant full-body donation. Thanks to you honorable funeral industry folks who aren't gouging folks for every last penny. People who do go in for traditional burial methods will certainly appreciate what you do. I have no idea WTF the zillion posts about saps, Ralphs, throw me in the trash, etc. are referring to. Story 3: The fashion industry. They rely on third-world factories to make their products and pay them pittance, then sell their products on for 10 times the price they pay the salary for their staff factory workers. Story 4: Dietary supplements. It's gotten better, but there's still a lot of half-truths and whole lies. Not all that long ago, it was seriously like the wild, wild west. Story 5: I've discussed this before, but knowledge of it isn't nearly as common as it should be. Mobile video games are literally designed to be frustrating instead of fun. There was a South Park episode about this not too terribly long ago, which I found to be incredibly accurate. Sadly, it didn't make quite the same splash that I'd hoped it would, given that quite a few people still aren't aware of what's going on. See, a great many mobile titles make use of mechanics that are put together with the intention of nurturing habitual behavior, frustrating a user, and then offering a slightly more enjoyable experience after money has been spent. The monetization model is created first, and then the game elements are built around it. This tactic has proven to be a more profitable model than actually offering entertainment, to the point where some companies take very careful steps to ensure that their games don't accidentally end up being fun. That sounds like satire, I know, but it's actually true. Let's suppose you had a game like Galaga, for instance. A mobile game version monetized with in-application microtransactions would probably give you the option to upgrade your ship and your weapons, purchase additional lives, and other such things. You'd be able to earn soft or grind currency by killing enemy units, with small amounts of hard or premium currency being awarded when you advanced in level or something. Now, that sounds like it would be alright, doesn't it? Hey race, where the manipulative part comes in. Though in this hypothetical game, it's virtually impossible to make it beyond the 3rd level without spending money, because there's a recommended item of some kind that can only be purchased with hard currency that corresponds in some way to real-world money, and it's impossible to earn enough of it from within the game. This is called a paywall, and a great many mobile games take advantage of the concept, albeit to varying degrees. There's only one small problem with the game concept I just outlined. It might actually be kind of fun to play. As I mentioned previously, it's a far better idea to frustrate a user and then give them a marginally better experience after they've converted to a paying player. So, maybe what we'd do with our hypothetical title is have all of the enemies slowly become more and more difficult over the course of 5 levels or so. Then, when a user inevitably died, would show them some kind of pop-up message the aliens are advancing. It might say, spend 15 space credits to revive. You'd be given the option to spend 15 hard currency for a single life, or to buy a pack of lives for only 50. Either way, immediately after you made the purchase, the game would become easier and more satisfying. If there were random items dropped by destroyed enemies, you'd see slightly more of them. Your score would increase more quickly, and there would be more explosions, or in the case of a game like Candy Crush, more flashing lights and noises after the level was done. You'd get bumped back into the typical difficulty and the same frustrating experience, until you spent more money, of course. TLDR: this TLDR will automatically unlock in 3303. Spend 89 Reddit bucks to speed up. Story 6: Dentistry, particularly dental chains like Aspen Dental, Bright Now, Affordable Dentures, Coast, etc. When I worked for Aspen, every office had to meet its financial goal at the end of the month. Oftentimes this meant exaggerating a patient's treatment plan and scaring them into unnecessary, expensive surgeries. A 15-year-old getting a full mouth extraction and put into dentures. I once worked for a dentist who told us that everyone who walks in the door has gum disease. Everyone. And the assistants would compete to see who could get the most people to agree to an oral cancer screening. Are you 25 years old and never smoked a cigarette or drank alcohol? Great, you absolutely need an oral cancer screening because Shannon really wants that Starbucks gift card. Shady billing and insurance claims, straight-up fraud, charges tacked onto bills that weren't discussed, like a $150 electric toothbrush you never agreed to purchasing. I ran far away from that place and never looked back. I interviewed for affordable and got an offer, but it's the same racket. Edit ID, like to clarify. Obviously, every profession has its bad apples. My comment is based on my experiences in corporate dentistry, specifically Aspen. There are plenty of excellent dentists who work at these chains. You just have to find them. My issue is mostly with the business model and the high-pressure salespeople with no medical backgrounds whatsoever. Just do your research, ask questions, get everything in writing, and be proactive. If you do these things, you'll be fine. I don't want my comment to scare anyone away from going to the dentist, which is an important thing to do. Story 7: Education. People are constantly trying to find ways to line their pockets instead of focusing on the students. And I say this while working for what I consider to be one of the better school districts in my state. Story 8: Olive oil. The amount of counterfeit olive oil is insanely higher than you think. You have a higher chance of buying olive oil that's been cut than buying real olive oil. Edit took out lard as an example of a cutting agent. Story 9: The credit card industry. There's a whole high-risk segment of the industry dedicated to preying on young people, old people, or people with bad financial histories and issuing them cards at extremely high interest rates. If you have a shitty credit score, be wary of any credit card offers you get. Story 10: Marketing and advertising. We can track and buy so much data on people to directly place specific ads. I can track the locations of cell phones and send ads based on the places you have physically been, even if it isn't directly related to my business. Story 11: You won't believe how shady the clickbait industry is. Before I actually get into this topic, I need to clarify a couple of things. Yes, there really is a clickbait industry. And yes, it's largely distinct from the world of online periodicals. I work for an outlet that straddles the line between the two, meaning that we actually create and publish real and original content, but we occasionally have to employ some less than desirable tactics in order to stay afloat. Said tactics include allowing questionable sites and services to advertise on our pages, putting vague but attention-grabbing headlines on fairly mundane pieces, and repurposing older content for use in new articles and videos. Now, let me tell you about the actual clickbait industry. There are sites, thousands upon thousands of them, in fact, which work as a kind of redirect network, for lack of a better term. You've probably stumbled into one of them in the past. Something mildly interesting shows up somewhere that you frequent, usually promising a story that seems just slightly shocking at first glance. If you click on the link, you're brought to a page that features dozens of these stories, each of which is accompanied by a thumbnail that not so subtly hints at something more intriguing. Clicking again will bring you to another such index, and then another, until sometimes, if you're very lucky, you'll get brought to a legitimate site, which has unwittingly paid to advertise via the wrong channels. More often than not, though, your final destination will be a poorly written, single-paragraph description of a photograph that was purchased from a paparazzi website, which is once again saturated in advertisements. Okay, so what's the big deal? You might be asking. They're just pulling revenue out of stupid people. That's true, and that is one of the primary goals. But it isn't the only one. See, each one of those clicks gathers a little bit of information, all of which is assembled into a kind of profile. Said profile is then used to target specific articles and advertisements at the people making their way through this online labyrinth, dangling tailored bait in front of their noses. Depending on the network, that bait may include political propaganda, misinformation, or even outright scams, with what a visitor sees being largely determined by what they've already said that they want. Hey, race an example. A person visits a website, and they see a story about a young female celebrity having a wardrobe malfunction. They click the link, which brings them to a site that resembles a pornographic thumbnail page from the early 2000s, albeit featuring celebrity gossip, technology news, and a host of other topics. The promised article about the famous nipple is included somewhere on the second or third line, in between one about a real-life lightsaber and one about an anti-aging technique. Our hapless visitor, having decided that the lightsaber sounds interesting, clicks on that link and gets brought to still another thumbnail page. This continues for another jump or two, And at the end, the algorithm behind the site knows that it's dealing with a male in his early to mid-20s who lives alone and prefers dogs over cats. The further down you go, the more insidious it gets. And if our wayward internet wanderer then goes back to the original site where he started, he'll see a new advertisement waiting, this one having been tailored to him. You might think that you're immune to this sort of thing. Maybe you assume that your ad blocker protects you, or perhaps you're just too shrewd to fall down the rabbit hole. Still, though, doesn't that lightsaber-induced wardrobe malfunction sound like something you should see? TLDR, the clickbait industry is even shadier than you think. Read the above comment to find out how. Story 12. I am on an aware rotation at a Veterans Affairs hospital. There is a major issue with employees who are either indifferent or incompetent when it comes to managing life-threatening illnesses. I think everyone knows this, but not everyone has witnessed this firsthand and seen the degree of incompetence with their own two eyes. I've had multiple occasions where I got called to evaluate a stroke patient, only to find that the primary team has no idea where they are. I'll hunt down the patient myself and find them alone in a hallway or in a CT scanner completely obtunded, and the primary team has no idea where they are. I saw a nurse delay seizure medications by 4 hours on a patient who was actively seizing and documented that she did give the medication on time. I had a nurse walk out of code because she didn't feel like doing it. I took care of a man who died from anoxic brain injury because the primary team over-diuresed a heart failure exacerbation. I have reported these incidents up the proper chain of command, and nothing gets done about it. The bad employees still work here. If you're a veteran and have a life-threatening emergency, go to a non-VA hospital. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. There is no ownership of responsibility at the VA. Story 13. Trucking. The margins are razor thin, and so everyone is trying to nickel and dime each other constantly. The drivers lie to their dispatchers. The dispatchers lie to the brokers lie to the clients. All of this for like 50 to 100 sometimes. Story 14. The blood donation centers are shady AF. Source: former branch manager, One Blood, and other blood buses are super shady. Employees are trained that every donor is a hero and that they're saving local lives. Horse. The blood is sold overseas to weird companies. The pint of blood a donor donated is worth several $100s depending on the day. The donor gets a t-shirt that we printed by the millions for pennies on the dollar. Blood centers make mega money, lie to donors, and treat employees like animals. Update: God forbid I actually disclose a personal life experience. No more comments from me. I shouldn't have to defend myself. Story 15. Specifically in the US, sporadically in other countries' academia. Yes, it does function like an industry, again, specifically in the US, and can get really, really shady. Public research-oriented universities are mostly above board, but the further you drift away from that, the shadier it gets. Diploma mills are a well-known phenomenon, but there are also plenty of legitimate or semi-legitimate establishments offering continuing education or distance education diplomas that are both expensive and not really worth the paper they're written on. Labor relations at most universities, including reputable ones, are okay, but becoming increasingly messed up. Part-time, dead-end teaching contracts are increasingly popular, and their conditions for the employee range from shitty to Dickensian. Story 16. Car dealerships are the worst. In a lot of places in the States, you can't order directly from the factories and legally have to buy through a dealership, and the dealerships will take a big cut of that. Also in my state, the big car dealerships successfully lobbied to make buying a car illegal on Sunday, and although I can't remember how it worked, the unofficial reason for it was because it would hurt smaller dealerships. Thankfully, I think most people realize they're pretty shady. Story 17. Car sales. I install computers at car dealerships. The salespeople don't pay attention to me while I work. Because I'm not a customer, I overhear them talking so much about all of their customers to the point that it's sad. It seems like they're always trying to rip people off. Story 18. The EPA rules on air pollution are comical. Basic rule is that if you measure it, you need to report it. So polluters find all sorts of loopholes where they do measure the pollution, but do it in a way that has no record. Stuff like using Draeger tubes or sulfur emissions, and make sure the only person with knowledge of it is gone when the inspector comes in, but the EPA brings it upon themselves. All they have to do is force people to report it and spend 10 a day on a tube. Even more comical is contract construction work for oil field projects. A lot of these guys get paid by the day hour, and when the contract runs out, they're out of work. Sabotage is rampant. There are stories of electrical techs getting done with a job, and suddenly the next day, all the wires are cut. My favorite is we was doing a TA and investigating some valves that wouldn't close. We found yoga pants wrapped around the valve stem. This leads to many questions. Was there yoga pants naturally produced in the earth? Did some operator get lucky with hot yoga chick and threw her pants into a compressor. Was there a pantless lady walking around a construction yard? Like what the even shadier, the companies get wind of this shady stuff going on. So they have creative ways of getting the construction guys out before they can commit sabotage. Like they'll knock on their door and tell them, we're paying you for a week, but you got to leave now, and take them straight on a bus to a charter plane and send them back down to Calgary before they can start breaking. The oil industry up in Canada is so shady. I could go on for days about some of that they do. I don't know about most people, but the home security industry is pretty shady. Story 19, the construction industry. You'd be amazed how much contractors try to cut corners and do shady to save on money. You know that joke about people standing around watching others work? Yeah, they're actually working too, specifically making sure the guys doing the construction aren't cheating. In a world without construction regulation and enforcement, your house gets a big crack in it due to shitty soil work, and now you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars to get that fixed. Story 20, collections. Yeah, I know most people assume they're shady, but I don't think most people know just how shady. There are clear laws in the U.S. defining what a collections agency can and can't do, how often they can contact you, what sort of pressure they can apply, what they can threaten you with, etc. These laws are not ambiguous. They leave little or no wiggle room. And yet, low-rent CAs violate them all the time. They'll buy debt for pennies on the dollar that's past the statute of limitations, meaning it's not legal to collect on it, then start calling the debtor and harassing them for payment. They'll call debtors and threaten them with legal action. Tell them that a process server is on the way to their house, that the IRS is going to audit them, that their wages will be garnished and assets seized. All blatant lies meant to scare the person into paying up. And I'm not talking about scammers from India here. I'm talking about legally registered collection agencies right here in the U.S. So how do they get away with this? Because the vast majority of people don't know their rights. They're already dealing with the stress and shame of being deep in debt with no way to pay it off. So if someone who sounds authoritative calls them up and lists all of the terrible things that are going to happen, they just assume that's correct. And the few times somebody knows enough to fight back, the worst that happens is that the CA pays a fine of a few $1,000s. That's usually covered by their liability insurance. And even if it isn't, it's just the cost of doing business, small price to pay for the cash they're raking in. And if they really get slammed, they can just close up shop and reopen under a different name. It's a really sleazy business with a lot of bad actors. Story 21, the games industry. By and large, it is notoriously shitty to its workers, unless one was a key member of a smash hit game. If you work in the games industry, be prepared to look for a new job every 12 to 18 months depending on the success of your game. Also be prepared to be paid anywhere from 50 to 75 of what you would be paid for similar work in the rest of the technology industry. Unless, of course, you're one of the aforementioned rock stars. Do you work in the gaming industry on contract? I got bad news for you. Many companies rely on armies of contractors for things like testing. Not an uncommon or inherently shady practice on its own. But many of these companies use a recruiting tactic that amounts to, do you like playing video games? Want to get paid for it? Come be a tester. The problem with that is that testing video games effectively doesn't come anywhere close to playing them. What you end up with is large groups of disillusioned people who take no ownership in their work, whose work is never guaranteed beyond 3 to 6 months, who are given far less credibility and voice than testers in every other software industry, and for whom many the draw of working on games is getting to say you work on games. But what if you're a contract tester and you really do care and want to make this a career? At best, you'll be put in charge of this army of jaded butts in seats and still let go along with the rest of them when launch hits, and suddenly, somehow, the need for that level testing is seen as unnecessary despite today's games as a service model and no reduction in the amount of content being generated. If there's one industry that needs to unionize today, it is the gaming industry. And we haven't even touched on the business side of things. Valve and Steam are everything. Reddit tends to accuse EA of being. They just do a much better job with PR and keeping it quiet when things go wrong. They provide enough consistent value to convince us all to look the other way. For every indie success story from Greenlight, there's a dozen that try to get started and failed under the crushing weight of the requirements Valve has for being on Steam. Story 22, the beauty and hair industry, is predicated on making you feel bad about the way you look so that you will pay money to look better. And keep paying. Get your hair cut once a month. Got to do your highlights, get your nails done, and if you don't, you're ugly, and people won't hire you for jobs, date you, or treat you kindly. It creates a problem where there wasn't one, and keeps you coming back for more. Story 23, the solar industry, July. When generation dipped to 35,967 megawatt-hours from 64,275 megawatt-hours in June. The plant's best month so far was particularly lacking in sunshine, BrightSource said. at least relative to the expectations the company developed over several years of meteorological study of the area. Story 24, this may seem fairly obvious, but the entire real estate industry is awash in overseas and laundered money in the United States, to the point that several markets would totally crash without these buyers. Everyone knows, no one cares. Story 25, the funeral industry. They're a business like any other. Don't tell them how much money you have to spend because they will spend it all. Newsflash, people, that mahogany casket with silk pillows you got for grandma protects her from the elements just as much as a simple plywood would. Story 26, this whole story and few others makes me worry about cruise ships and how safe they are and how some crew are treated. Story 27, bottled water. Not just the high markup, but also the source of the water. It's perfectly legal to name it something like Nature's Spring and sell tap water. Story 28, MLM, multi-level marketing, network marketing apparently, because I know several people who are involved. I guess most people don't realize how truly shady and predatory these companies are if they're so willing to jump right in to make a quick buck from their phones. When in reality, they're the customer, and 99 of the time, they end up losing money, not to mention harassing all of their family friends. Story 29, IT shops, IT consulting for every good IT company. There's 3 others that will cut every corner, X10000000. So, if the IT company caters mostly to residential, they will cut every corner, cut down the middle, across. Really, they just put the whole thing in a shredder. I've seen VPNs without authentication literally just pop in an IP address, and you're in their entire network, intentional sabotage of computers and servers, grossly overcharging for items. Bonus if they used a free product to fix the issue, they overcharge for that states, not for commercial use. We've gotten clients that were told, oh, but competitor, they left said Windows XP is fine. We then later find out they have spent hundreds of dollars a quarter working on fixing issues with said computer, putting in bids for big government jobs, and accidentally leaving off entire builds, so their price was the lowest, won the bid, and later requote the job they already won, literally swapping out good quality parts in a customer's computer server with inferior equivalents, when the customer just needed a keyboard replacement. Later selling the parts they stole. One of our competitors does a client's alarm system, but we do their IT. They went into the server room and rearranged battery backup devices to cover the vents on the server, so it would overheat, which it did. All from sketchy IT companies that are more concerned about being the cheapest and fastest, and not the professional, proper, and security-compliant TLDR, horror stories from sketchy mechanics purposely breaking your car, or doing other sketchy. Yeah, IT as a service is just as bad, if not worse, especially if they cater to residential. Story 30, duct cleaning. Ask anyone in the AC industry and they'll tell you it's BS. Almost all ducts are fiberglass or plastic on the inside, not metal, and thus cannot be cleaned by brushing it. And yet I see duct cleaning vans all the time with pictures of before and after on the side. They basically spray a scented spray into your vents and charge you hundreds of dollars. Story 31, the American comic book industry. Starting rate for a pencil page for the biggest companies is $125 to $150. For 12 to 16 hours per page, that's about $10 an hour for a craft you went into debt to learn, drawing characters that are recognizable around the world. And unless you're one of the handful of rock stars in the industry, you're not even considered a meaningful member of the creative team. You're not allowed to interpret anything. You're just supposed to mindlessly execute the will of the writer. Before Disney threw out all of their animators, it was very similar for them. Near minimum wage for tirelessly making the thing that makes the company hundreds of millions of dollars. This is why AI will take over creative industries sooner than people are willing to admit. Frontline creatives are already treated like robots by the companies they work for. Corporations won't really have to make any changes to the workflow to make the switch. We revere entertainment and culture so much, but give no respect or reward for the people who create it. Story 32, political consultants. They don't really care about a campaign winning. They're more interested in fabricating opposition, so they have a reason to scam more money out of donors. Political parties are just big money makers for consultants, billions of dollars. Story 33, you'll toss out an interesting one that may not follow the rules, but YOLO accounts payable for any big company when dealing with a small company. Let's say you start a business selling and fixing widgets. Then one day, a massive Fortune 500 drops and order 100x bigger than anything you've ever done before on you. This is it. This is the big time. You're going to be rich and your business is going to be a success. So you buy equipment, hire staff, increase your capacity to fill these orders, and then suddenly, all you have is your deposit, or worse, nothing. Where's the rest off your bill? So you call their accounts payable receivable, depending on your company, and they tell you that they cut checks on 30th of every month. Well, that doesn't do you a lot of good. You have to pay your employees every 2 weeks. So you take out a loan based on the sale at an outrageous interest rate. Then the 30th finally comes and your check isn't there. So you go call whoever your contact is and they tell you that they stopped payment because 5 of your widgets are defective and you need to adjust your invoice. So you do so, and suddenly, nope, gotta wait till the 30th again. So you decide you aren't going to send them orders anymore until they pay you. Then you get a phone call from your contact's boss yelling why you stopped sending shipments. When you respond that you need payment, he informs you that checks are cut on the 30th. Then you have a choice. You can continue to gamble and hope you eventually get paid, or cut them off and lose your biggest client. So you gamble again, take out another loan, and carry on. Finally, the 30th rolls around again, and you get your check, except the decimal is put in the wrong place. $2 million check is only $200,000. So then you call and spend 2 to 3 weeks trying to get an adjusted check. By this time, you're running on empty, you can't get any loans, and your only option is to sue them. Oh, wait, you're out of money. Can't afford a lawyer, and they have a GC on staff ready to drag this out until your business folds. You can't just go back to your old client base because you leverage yourself to have these huge orders coming in. That's how mom and pop small businesses get treated by the big guys. Now, the business folding is the extreme end of the hyperbole spectrum, but this is something that even Trump's company has done. Story 34, any form of sales that involves a quote. I have seen people close deals for $200K with a cost of $100K in a market that usually sees 10 margins. Whatever you will pay is what it will cost. Grind when you're seeking quotes. Ask for 3 quotes, and tell each source they are up against 2 competitors, and you hope they win. Then go back to your winning bid and tell them they were close, and that you will allow them 1 requote if they choose before you issue your PO elsewhere. I sometimes fantasize about hopping the wall and becoming a purchaser, because I know all the tricks. I would save a company 4 to 5 times my salary easy, but no money to be made in purchasing and plenty in sales. I feel dirty right now. Scientific publishing, but the culture around publishing is terrible. Scientists have to publish to keep their job, more publications, more grants, job security, but only positive results tend to get published. So people overstate the significance to get published, or rush experiments to beat the competition, or throw on some statistics without knowing what they're doing, or lose their job because that something wasn't the case and they didn't get published, only to have someone else fall into that pitfall later. The scientific problems tend to get fixed over time, simply because so many people work on a topic, but many individual scientists lose to the pressure and leave the field, or worse. Story 35, the dairy industry. As crazy as it sounds, most people in the world, I believe the last estimate I saw was 75, are actually lactose intolerant in some capacity. Humans are also one of, if not the only species to continue to consume milk after infant's early childhood. With this in mind, the dairy industry has ties with the organizations that determine the necessary food groups for school lunches and stuff like that, which lets them continue to promote their product to the world as necessary or important when in fact it is actually disadvantageous to most people. There's a lot more shady stuff like that the further you research it, even down to the connotations of the term lactose intolerant, and so on. Crazy stuff. Story 36, even after all of the light put on Hollywood, we don't have a clue to the depths of depravity in that industry. And it's been going on since the 1920s at least. We've let that slide for a century. Story 37, I don't know if it's shady, but the elevator industry is kind of weird. If a client is on a maintenance contract and doesn't pay their bill, they get the breaker switch flipped off and a lock placed through the handle that stops it from being turned back on. When they pay, the lock comes off. Kind of like a boot on your car for unpaid parking tickets. Story 38, diamonds. Nearly all diamond mines in the world are owned by De Beers, so they can mark up the price thousands of times. Diamonds, in and of themselves, are almost worthless, as they're really not rare at all. Story 39, blood industry. Despite the image of blood donations being a noble thing, and thus used in part to justify why the donor is not paid, everything beyond that point is pure business. It is sold like any other product regardless whether it is a non-profit or not. Also, they can get very hostile if you start digging. Further listening? Story 40, Renaissance fairs. I can only speak for my own, but most employees are conned into this summer of a lifetime volunteering. And if you're lucky enough to get paid to stand in the sun for 9 hours a day, it's a gracious stipend of maybe $40 a day. We're supplied strange tasting water and camp in sometimes hazardous conditions. Not to mention the rampant creep culture of older men grooming young girls and all manner of insanity going on behind the scenes. This doesn't even account for the managerial shenanigans and competition between fairs. Be kind to the goons in the costumes, and maybe tip them if they make you laugh. They need it. Story 41, financial planning, specifically investing. It's sad, but most people are too ignorant to even realize they're making poor decisions and/or have poor decisions made for them. Story 42, olive oil. Some estimates put the amount of mislabeled, low-quality, or otherwise adulterated olive oil on the shelves as high as 80. Labels often lie about things like country of origin or whether the oil is actually extra virgin. Sometimes you might actually just be buying canola oil with green food coloring. The mafia is heavily involved, and government regulators do precious little to stop it. Story 43, I'm surprised no one said organized religion in this post. One convenient edict in your religious text, and boom, you've convinced people to donate 10 of their income. I've even personally seen pastors insist that his flock look at their pay stubs and donate gross income, not net. Because apparently, God is a tax accountant, and numbers are super important. Now, I realize that your standard mom and pop church needs money to keep the lights on, and that doesn't bother me in the slightest. What does bother me is churches with names like Connection Point or Abundant Harvest that have 6 sanctuaries, a playground, a bookstore, a coffee shop, a sound and lighting system that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars with some gel-haired dingus named Pastor Hat that drives to the church in a Cadillac Escalade and insists that the money is doing God's work. And let's not get started in people like Joel Osteen or Peter Popoff, restaurant industry. In my restaurant days, some of the common things I've seen are unpaid overtime, tax evasion, under-the-table work, harassment, rampant drug alcohol abuse, drug dealing, and generally a complete disregard for labor laws. This applies for any kind of establishment from pubs to fine dining, real estate agencies. Never worked in it, but where I am Vancouver, they are basically self-regulated, so not really regulated at all. Many cases of fraud where agents get away with large sums of money, either via overcharging commission or flipping and only having to pay a small fine and a short suspension if caught. Story 44, mattress industry. But to a point, it's not that they're all marked up ridiculously, they really aren't, BTW, but the makeup of the beds are total bullshit. The only brand that's worth anything close to its price is Kingsdown. Since they make theirs realistically and actually with the person in mind, Tempur-Pedic only uses 2 to 3 layers in each bed. They just add a little bit more per level and jack up the price. Every other one tries to claim that firmer material on the top is highly beneficial. But in reality, you're rendering over half the bed useless, so you aren't even using half what you paid for it. Side note, adjustable bases are a godsend, though. Story 45, nail salons. I think more people realize it now, since the NYT article a few years ago, but a whole lot of them utilize human trafficking for labor, are unlicensed, and are prostitution fronts. Story 46, the charity industry. A lot of charities have something like 80 to 90 administrative costs, so 10 cents on the dollar is going to the charity. Yeah, I know it takes work to run a charity, but if the head person is making $500K a year and the charity is still only putting up those kind of numbers, then maybe some people need to be fired.